Good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to today's Association of Cultural Enterprises webinar, brought to you with our great friends and partners at Peridot Partners. Say partners too many times in a sentence. It's a real pleasure to have so many of you joining us from across the sector this morning. Thank you so much for taking your time on a Thursday morning. Hope you've all got teas, coffees, and ready to really stick into this exciting subject. As many of you know, one of the association's key roles is obviously to support our members not only developing their commercial excellence, but also in strengthening and leadership, governance, organisational resilience that underpin our successful cultural organisations. And strong boards and effective leadership have never been more important as our sector continues to navigate those changes that are going on and seizing the opportunities. And today's session is a fantastic opportunity to explore those themes with two people who work with organisations across the cultural heritage sector and wider not-for-profit every day. Delighted to have been joined by two good friends of ours, David Hingley, Head of Arts, Heritage and Culture at Peridot Partners. Many of you know David has so many years of experience working across the arts and heritage and cultural sectors in visitor attractions, supporting obviously to recruit exceptional leaders at Peridot Partners. David's work is rooted in belief that thoughtful, value-driven leadership makes a real difference to organisational success. And I'm sure, like many of you who have viewed from the top a few weeks ago, really enjoyed David's session there, looking at recruitment and matching our values of recruitment. We're also delighted that we're joined by Alistair Mitchell, Principal Consultant. Alistair's nearly 20 years now working in recruitment across the not-for-profit sector, partnering with mission-led organisations to recruit executive and non-executive leaders to go on to make lasting impacts. Alistair's experience spans a wide range of leadership and government appointments, governance appointments as well, and helping organisations attract and retain talent they have to thrive. And today, together, David and Alistair will be sharing some real practical insights into building high-performance boards and recruiting effectively for that leadership success. Going to explore some topics around board effectiveness, board composition, skills audit, succession planning, onboarding, development, governance, fundraising, broadening diversity and representation within board recruitment. How on earth they're going to get that into this short session, I don't know, but loads of topics to go on and loads of topics I know are so important within our organisations. So whether you're currently, recruiting trustees, you're recruiting a chair, or you're on a board yourself, looking at board structures and thinking about future leadership of the organisation, I'm sure we're all going to come away this morning with loads of practical ideas and food for thought. So like we did to say earlier on with David's session at View from the Top, which so many people have since then have told me how they've been changing their recruitment ideas and doing stuff going forward from David's ideas. So the format this morning, David and Alistair are going to talk for about half an hour or so. A nice presentation, taking us through those topics. There's plenty of time for questions and discussion. Fee's in charge of the chat room, so please do load up your questions as we go along, and then Fee can bring them to. So if you think of something, just put it in the chat, and then we can go back to those questions at the end, and hopefully pick up some more Q&A as well. So we are recording the session, so if any of you need to leave or want to share it with your colleagues, you can do. So that, I think, enough of intro for me. Enough certainly get talking. Pleasure to hand over to David and Alistair, and thank you both for joining us, and as ever for your support for the association, which we are so grateful for. So thank you both.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for everyone for joining us this morning. Wow, after that wonderful introduction, I feel like there's little more to add on that note. So we attached a picture of David and I on our next slide, as Anton Deck, I'm the one on the left, David's the one on the right, and we'll try and ensure that any events over the future will always stand in that order, so you know who's who. We always love working with the association and its members, and really value the connections and conversations that follow each event. Peridot over the past 15 years have been incredibly privileged to work with some wonderful organisations across the sector, not only in recruiting chair and trustee positions, but also helping senior leaders navigate the challenges of building diverse and resilient boards. And we hope that by sharing what we've learned and the conversations we've been a part of will prompt further discussions, help challenge the status quo, and really better understand how those conversations really do impact the sector and the communities they serve. As Paul mentioned there, we've got a fairly hefty agenda, which we'll try and get through as best as we can. So we're going to look at board effectiveness and composition, looking at skills audits and analysing gaps, succession planning to ensure we are future-proofing the board, having a look at best practices and considerations in the onboarding process, governance and fundraising and the role each board member plays. And as Paul mentioned there, a topic David spoke about at the Design Museum last month, broadening diversity in the recruitment process. Yes, we would welcome any thoughts and questions. So if you do have anything you'd like to discuss, pop it in this group chat. We'll do our very best to cover as much as we can. Equally, if there are questions we're unable to answer today, we'd happily go away and come back separately, arrange a time to discuss in more detail. So yes, without further ado, I'll hand over to David to talk about board effectiveness and composition.
Morning, everybody. Great to be with you this morning. And as Al says, we're going to talk through what we're learning, what we're hearing when we work with boards and when we work with organisations. So I'm sure there's plenty that's familiar, but hopefully there are some ideas in here that you can borrow with pride from others and from other organisations we've been working with. I mean, so first off, we know we want effective boards. We really need to think about what effective means. And I'm going to sit on the fence a bit and say, well, that kind of depends on your organisation. It probably depends on what the makeup of the board is at present, where you want to go in the future. It'll depend a little bit on the nature of your exec team, who's involved, what skill sets you've got. And it will depend on sort of where you might be in the cycle of development for an organisation. So, I mean, I think the first thing people often talk about is that they want a board that's engaged. And one of the things there is that balance between the time people have got to give, the expertise they may have, if they're currently, for example, within the sector, which people often look for individuals within the sector who have that understanding of the cultural landscape, but also individuals who may be kind of stepping back from a career and therefore have more time, but perhaps are not as well networked as they may have been in the past. So we know that engagement is a real balance, and that what's most critical is to think about, I've often heard people talk about that noses in, hands off. You want an engaged board, you want a board that asks the right questions, you want a board that are involved and supportive. You don't want a board that are doing the job of the executive. And so I think one of the most important things is in defining that effectiveness, defining what that relationship needs to look like and being really clear and happy to do that at the start. People who are considering trustee roles, whether they're experienced or whether they're new, one of the things they most often will ask is, how much involvement does this organisation want me to have? And being able to really explain that right from the start is one of the best things I think you can do to make sure that those people who are joining then know what they're coming into and what you expect from them. So the other element about this, it really familiar, I know, but those roles and responsibilities, having a role profile for trustees, quite often it will be fairly broad, but just having that profile there to pull people back to is really important. And thinking about across that board, what responsibilities individuals might take on and really defining that whilst, you want a broad experience. You want people who are not sort of siloed, but making sure you've thought about how that all fits together. In terms of effectiveness as well, what policies and processes might you be working on in the future, or might you be updating? Where do you feel that you need a policy or a process championed? So thinking about what that looks like and understanding as well from your board where you want them to be informed, where you want them to be making decisions, and where you want them to be supporting with strategic lead. So I think the final thing I would say about the effectiveness point is you want a board that serves the organisation. You don't want an organisation that serves the board. So it's thinking about, what is effective? Effective is not spending lots and lots of time on huge bundles of board papers that perhaps don't get read. It's about agreeing what works so that you can really make sure that's fine-tuned. I've talked about the mix of people already. The composition obviously is really important, and Al's going to talk a little bit about how you can look at that. But particularly if you've got the opportunity and you're recruiting multiple trustees, I would always say, think about the balance of those people you're taking on. You might have some standout candidates, but they might all have the same kind of experience, the same lived experience. They might come from the same demographic. So think about what that mix could be like when you're recruiting multiple roles at the same time. It's a real opportunity. And what does that mix need to be? Are you aiming, for example, as we know, we've talked a lot about sort of a place at the table. Are you aiming to be more commercial? Do you need someone with more of a comms experience? Do you want someone who's relational, who can build your network? So it's constantly evolving, and you should, with the board, it's really important, I think, not to look in isolation at individual appointments. And then to come back to your articles of association, your memorandum of understanding, what you should have in terms of being quorate, in terms of numbers, thinking about there might be times when a smaller board actually is useful during maybe a development phase, but you need to think about how you will expand that board when you need to. But you shouldn't feel, I don't think either, that you need to have the maximum number of trustees. You shouldn't have people on the board just for the sake of it, but you might use some of those roles to think about the future and therefore give you the opportunity to develop people who've got perhaps less trustee experience. So I would say think of the board mix the same way as you think of your program mix. What's right for your audience in terms of what's going to drive both your mission and your commerciality to ensure your organisation is sustainable. Same for the board. What mix do you want around there? In terms of context, I've talked about this a little bit already, but if you've got a major capital project coming up, that will often mean that you're looking for experience in that area, which you may not have had before. You might want different things at different times. So always be thinking about what points people are going to end their period on the board. Their board terms of sort of 3 to 5 years we know is standard. So how are you going to fill those gaps when they come up? Is it with someone with the same skills or different skills? And another thing I would really encourage people to think about is almost task and finish groups. So that doesn't necessarily have to be a full trustee role, but if you can take someone on to act as an advisor, a supporter with a particular project with very clear mandate, they may be someone who can come onto the board in the future, and you've got a chance to sort of work with them in a different way. And the final point, I think, is that really important. We know that usually when we work with boards, we'll talk about the time requirement, what people will need to do in terms of the quarterly meetings, quite usually, or committees, and also that board away day. People talk about how important that is. So making sure you have that, but also think about continuous improvement. There's lots of free information out there. We know from various organisations, the Charity Commission, Association for Cultural Enterprises themselves, Association of Independent Museums. Are you accessing that and pointing trustees to that, especially trustees who might be from outside our sector, who you've had during the board to diversify your experience? And remembering again that the board are volunteers. So if you're giving ongoing training to the volunteers in your organisation, how is that reaching the board, and are they getting the relevant coverage themselves? So just some kind of initial thoughts, and I'm going to hand over to Al now to talk through how you can look at auditing your board skills.
Thanks, David. So I guess the first thing to remind ourselves on is that boards are not static. What your organisation required 3 years ago is likely to be very different from what it needs today, and in the next 3 years. So I guess it's really crucially important to map your board's current competencies against your immediate but also your future strategic plans. So thinking about what skills do you currently have, what skills do you need to ensure you're meeting those strategic objectives, and then from that creating a skills matrix, and really using that data to kind of identify gaps in your board. And I think when we talk about gaps, it's often easy to fall into the trap of certain disciplines or experience, but I think it's really valuable and important, especially when we're talking about broadening diversity, is to really look beyond those technical skills. Consider age, gender, cultural diversity, sector background. All of these things will be really important for considering what a diverse board looks like. I guess it's also really important to identify the risks. Does one person possess all the knowledge in one area, and what would happen if that person leaves? We'll cover that in more detail when we look at succession planning, but really important to take a look at that early and identify any potential risks that might lie there. When it comes to the board meeting itself, really take time to reflect and ask yourself some really important questions. Are the meetings effective? Do you find yourself covering the same points each time, or are you allowing a range of topics on a rotating basis? We've had some really interesting conversations, and some of the most effective boards we see map out each year in advance, really allocating time to cover specific topics, agendas, and that really just ensures that trustees are being utilised in the most efficient way possible. Continuous reviews, that's chair reviews, individuals, obviously having a look at the skills matrix, having a look at the board induction, self-assessments, all of these things when done regularly will really help to ensure you're creating sustainable and diverse boards. And in our opinion, all of these should be done annually. It's really important that they're looked at on a regular basis. I guess it's also worth noting that boards shouldn't sit alone from an organisation. They really should feel part of that organisation and act very much as an advocate and supporter, and really feel engaged in the mission and the communities that they serve. So if we come on to the next slide, around succession planning, I think it's a common theme, but start early. It's never too early to start thinking about board succession. In fact, I'd probably go one step further and say you should always be thinking about attracting and retaining and developing board members. The best boards are always looking inwards as well as outwards in that regard. So thinking about, are there board members of your board that you've identified as future chairs, and how are you supporting them and giving them the platform that they need to gain that required knowledge and competencies? As mentioned before, it's really good practice to identify where you might be exposed should board members choose to leave. So thinking about that element as well. It really is a collective responsibility. I think a common mistake we often hear is leaving recruitment solely to the chair. We strongly feel that all board members should utilise their own network, not rely on it solely, but certainly utilise their own network to help build relationships and identify future trustees. That being said, it is also really important to understand the limitations your network has, with regards to diversity, and we'll talk about that more later. Mentoring new board members, vitally important, and nurturing future leaders. David will talk more about a sort of buddy scheme when it comes to new board members, but nurturing future leaders will really help drive confidence in the boardroom and give those people the confidence to speak up at meetings, and adding those fresh perspectives, which in turn helps strengthen the relationships across the board.
Thanks, Al. And I think what I'm going to talk a little bit about now is that onboarding and ongoing development that's really vital. We know it's a lot of work to build the right boards, to have that board engaged. People put in a lot of time. There's an investment of time and energy. And I think kind of one of the things we've just talked about is that aim of diversifying, to do that and to really reflect the communities you serve. I think it's the onboarding and the development. It has to be sort of a constant rhythm and routine. That's not necessarily loads of work, but I think it's about always having as much transparency as you can and sharing what your board does, how it works, who's involved, and just trying to demystify that. Because if you think about some of the audiences you're reaching out to, those are also the people that should be on your board, right? So how can you explain a little bit about what it is your board does, and how somebody can help to really potentially be involved in that and understand that they can have a voice on it? So in terms of sort of introducing people to the board, I think really important to ensure that this is as thorough. I mean, it should be. If you think about the responsibility individuals are taking on, this needs to be as thorough as any other role in your organisation. I mean, one thing that I know is best practice that many people on this call will be doing is that opportunity to observe meetings initially, so that before becoming formally part of the board, there's that opportunity to sort of understand the board culture a bit. What I would say is that if you have preferred candidates as trustees during the process, there should be the opportunity to meet other trustees, members of the team in a more informal way. We know that these are voluntary roles, so you're asking a lot of people already, so that the process itself needs to be as simple as possible. But at the same time, anybody that wants to join your board but hasn't had the opportunity to meet the team or to understand the organization, it's probably a little bit of a red flag, because that's the core of what you need them to be delivering and embodying. So looking at those opportunities to make sure people understand what it is they're coming into. And again, remembering some people, this would be their first appointment. They're probably thinking that you're all sitting around a big table. You probably quite often are sitting around a big table if you've got the space. But what does a board meeting look like? How does it work? So anything you can do, both through allowing people to observe, but also if there's an opportunity to sort of put some clips together, for example, that you might share with potential candidates to just show kind of a board meeting in action or explain it, the same as you would if you're thinking about things like visual stories for visitors. So that observation, I think, is a really good chance to meet people. And also, I would encourage, quite often we'll ask someone to come and observe a meeting, ask them if they enjoyed it, if they therefore want to become part of the board. But giving them an opportunity outside of that as well to say, well, did you have any concerns? Was there any feedback about what additional support you feel you might need? So the opportunity to talk to the chair maybe, or the chief exec. Do you need your papers in a different way? Just to really give people the space to talk about that. Needs to be a strategic approach, as we know, that ongoing development. So I've talked a little bit about that sort of life cycle. So trustees will generally join. There'll be a period of them getting up to speed. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But, there'll be then a period where they're coming towards an end of a term. Are they going to stand again? Is that an assumption you would want to make? Do you want them to stand again? What might that look like, and how might you manage it? Quite often people may feel they've contributed everything they can, and maybe they're not at the end of their term. And I think you don't just want people filling a space on the board necessarily. You want people that are contributing and feel that they have a lot more to give. So I think constantly checking in on that and making sure that your board cycle, if you like, as far as possible, is aligned with your strategic cycle, so that you can make sure that you're reaching out and capturing exactly what you need from the board to coincide with what you need as a business, commercially, as a mission, driving your mission, and just making sure that you can align that as far as possible. In terms of induction, really induction packs in whatever form that be, whether, again, and you can use different formats for that, whether that is written, whether that is, many of us have volunteer handbooks. Have we got a trustee handbook, a pared down version, or something that just sort of gives examples, for example, example of minutes for meetings, or what the management accounts look like, just to kind of talk that through. I mean, also something that can be useful in your wider organisation to share with individuals who might not be in front of the board very often, to show what goes on. So as far as possible, what could you share? What could you show people in terms of your ways of working? And then the last one there is sort of, and again, I know many organisations do this, but I can't stress enough the opportunity to have kind of a board buddy when you join, to have somebody that you can really check in with. And I think the other element is, if you're taking someone on as a trustee and you want them to be very involved in a particular area, or to support a particular member of the team as a mentor, maybe you've taken on someone to support marketing, for example, making sure that there is at least initially a formal opportunity to have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, and start that relationship off. So just some ideas there. I know many of these people will already be working on. Never recruit a role, and this is in any aspect at the moment, frankly, where people don't talk about fundraising as you would expect, and the landscape at the moment in the sector. And I think that's important. And I think we know that every member of the board, it's a whole board responsibility. But we also know that it's something that people do get worried about. And I think it does put people off. So I think when we're talking about fundraising, we need to make sure that we are sharing with individuals that what the organisation needs is financial sustainability, and that comes through different paths. So it could be that you actually want someone who is more commercial, who can support the enterprise elements of the organisation to deliver more. It could be that you need somebody who can support your fundraising team. People will say, oh, can you find me some rich trustees? Let's be honest. And of course, that would be lovely. But I think boards have changed, and we know it's very much around what networks people can bring, how they can support. So whilst it would be lovely, I don't think we should be relying on people with checkbooks to join boards. What I would suggest is that we think about things like campaign boards, how we can again set up task and finish groups around particular campaigns. But what we should do is make sure that every individual understands the organisation, the mission, and really importantly, the values. Because if I come on to that brokering relationships, what I think people can bring is that understanding of relationships inside and outside the sector that they can bring from their own networks, where we can learn, borrow with pride, or steal ideas from. And that's where board members can really kind of open doors and advocate. But what I would say is that you need that elevator pitch. Everybody needs to know what it is they're pitching, what works for your organisation. So that brings me on to that sort of ethical stewardship, which we know as trustees, individuals are just there for a period of time, and the whole aim is to pass that organisation on successfully. So is everyone clear on the values genuinely? And are they clear on how you're applying them in terms of who you might or may not want to work with, and why that is? Which is the last point there, is risk appetite. Risk registers, I know boards often pore over them, perhaps not as excitedly as they should, given some of the risks that are on there. But I think the other thing is, what's the risk appetite for your organisation? If you're asking board members to go out and to advocate and to help you to fundraise or to attract grants, etc., you've really got to have thought about what you're prepared to do, who you're prepared to work with, what artistic risks are you taking, what risks are you prepared to take as an organisation financially, if you're in a position to do that. So really being aware of what it is you're going out and asking for, how you're asking for it, and that this is not something that necessarily everyone feels comfortable with. So making sure you have given trustees the skills so that they can feel that they do it in their own way through their own networks. Al.
Thanks, David. So when we talk about broadening diversity, and obviously it's something that David spoke in depth about last month, and I alluded it to earlier about sort of, to be truly inclusive, boards, you kind of really do need to move away from being solely reliant on kind of known entities and taps on shoulders. Yes, absolutely utilize your networks, but we need to look further afield than just relying solely on those. So running thorough competency-based recruitment processes that really do welcome different ideas and perspectives. I think a proactive, not a passive approach is really important. So really ensuring that you're looking outside of those obvious areas. I think running diverse recruitment campaigns is essential. And I guess a way to look at it is think about the conversations you're having around reaching wider audiences and communities, and really embed those strategies into your recruitment process. We know that traditionally boards have not been diverse, and thinking about how reaching out to the same communities that you serve, will help ensure that they are being represented as well. So I think that's all really, really important. Financial barriers, offering expenses is standard and commonplace, but we are hearing, across the sector that often trustees might be inclined not to claim expenses, and I think the danger there is that before long it becomes the norm. That trustees don't typically claim their expenses here, and I think that is a difficult one. And I think to be truly inclusive, you need to create a culture where you are expected to claim back those expenses. And if there's people who wish to, can always donate back to the organisation at a later date. But just little things like that can sometimes carry significant weight. There's a real sort of balance between time commitments and insights. Providing up-to-date sector and organisational insights. It really does deepen a trustee's understanding and therefore their impact that their role plays, and their engagement as well. Having a look at the board remaining sufficiently connected, but without creating an unsustainable workload. So, like David mentioned, membership associations, webinars. What are you doing there to kind of keep them connected to the sector and the organisation in which they're representing? could you consider a co-chair model, to help strike the balance where time commitments or skill gaps, are evident. There's a whole host of things that have come up, this morning, and many people might feel overwhelmed or unsure where to start. So, our advice is two things. Engage with a trusted advisor. A couple, or reach out to a peer. Our sector's always been hugely supportive and collaborative, and we've always found that people are more than happy to share what has worked well. What are other organisations doing, and who's leading the way in attracting diverse board members. David, I think we're back over to you. I don't know if you can...
Oh, apologies. Yeah, yeah. So really, we're leading on to that inclusive board culture, and it is a challenge. And I think some of the challenges have grown, frankly, in terms of sort of the time people have available, some of the expectations in terms of what being on a board can mean, and I think in other areas, organisations have really tried to open up to more and more diverse, multiple voices on boards, and I think it's quite often around the fact that people are looking for certain levels of experience, and perhaps there are not huge numbers of people, as we know, across our sector who have that from the sort of from the kind of demographics we're trying to attract. So I think important to think about the environment you're bringing people into, how you can make sure they are welcomed, how you can ensure that people are supported. And a lot of that, I think, is about working across organisations, frankly. So I think boards can, whilst other parts of the organisation can often spend a lot of time talking to peers, perhaps boards don't do that as much as they could. So maybe thinking about where we can support, but also working, for example, we've worked with organisations like 2020 Levels, who work with global majority young people in terms of looking at opportunities they may not have considered. So thinking about how you can tap into pools of talent that may not even be thinking of joining you, but could be really interesting and could bring different things. Coming back to what I talked about a lot earlier this month, that accessibility. We have done huge amounts as a sector to make our places, our organisations, welcoming to visitors with different needs. So much of that could easily be applied to things like boards and to our core recruitment, and we're still not doing it. So I would encourage you to look at what materials you already have, what you can share and repurpose. Don't reinvent the wheel, but maybe you can adapt it slightly. I think you need to think about the value of people's time in terms of the fact that, in the past, perhaps, to be a bit stereotypical, we had a lot of boards with people who maybe had been able to take early retirement. That is much less of a thing, as we know now. But making sure that there are opportunities for people who are in full-time work to attend your meetings. So when are your meetings happening? Can you shift those around? The kind of people you're looking for, maybe if you're looking for younger trustees, they're probably not in control of their diary in the same way some of your other board members might be. So thinking about that and making sure that in your wider conversations and outreach that you do as an organisation, kind of constantly thinking about maybe some of these individuals could be our trustees. I don't mind saying that I'm a trustee on a board where we struggled to recruit, and it turned out we just failed to ask our actual volunteer group whether there was anybody within it who would like to move into becoming a trustee. So something as simple as that. So really, we know that we want boards to be reflective of the people that we're serving and supporting. So you'd be glad to hear we've nearly finished talking at you. Just a few key takeaways, I think, really. So plan ahead. We've gone on and on about that. I think volunteer roles, we're always thinking, we know how important voluntary roles are, but these are the most important volunteer roles in an organisation. So have you got a bit of a talent pipeline? Who might there be who could be your next trustee? And are there ways you could involve them in other aspects of the organisation to warm them up, frankly, in some senses? I think that thing about opening up, boards are still a mystery to many people. They've got this view in their head about what they're like. Maybe your board is like that. Maybe it needs to be a bit less about let's go through the same agenda we go through every time we meet. Let's shake things up. Let's have some sort of different types of sessions within that. So think about that and think about how you can share that with people so they can see what goes on behind those kind of closed doors as far as possible. enabling that talent there. So think about those barriers, like Al said, making sure people are aware that claiming expenses is a norm, making sure that people are aware that you can have things like co-chairs, that you can look at hybrid meetings, really making sure people understand that boards can be more flexible. And then I think the last one is, once you've gone through all that and you've got somebody who is committed, they volunteered, they want to join your organization, they want to do this, they want to give up their time.
I think we're losing you, David. Your microphone seems to have...
Look after them and review their contributor to think about what they might be able to do differently. Say, just, I know it's time, but I don't know if you can still hear me.
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, apologies. Yeah, so I don't know where you lost me, but basically I was banging on about investing a bit more time to make sure that your board is supported and you get the most out of them, because otherwise you'll spend a lot of time trying to build a new board or to re-engage. The last thing we've got here is a bit of a quote, which I think is self-explanatory. So you're looking for leadership from your board. Good leadership requires you to surround yourself with people of diverse perspectives who can disagree with you without fear of retaliation. I hope there's no fear of retaliation on any of your boards, but there might be a fear of speaking up because people feel like they don't have the expertise or the experience, and just being mindful of that is really important. So that's it from our presentation point of view. So I'm going to suggest I stop sharing my screen, and hopefully we can answer a few questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you both so much. I can't believe how much you managed to cover in a short space of time. Looking at, just structuring the meetings, and then different ways, different tips and ideas on where to find your perfect board. So we do have a couple of questions, and keep popping them in the chat. If you've got any thoughts, I'll pick them out. So Gordon Morrison, CEO of the Enchanted Forest, about to undertake a round of board recruitment. He's said, in my experience, so many cultural organizations are regularly looking to bring greater financial expertise to their boards, the Enchanted Forest included. How do we stand out from the crowd and make ourselves appealing when trying to recruit, when so many others are recruiting for the same expertise?
I can't believe Gordon's had to ask how to stand out from the crowd. But no, genuinely, I think it's a really good question. I think finance is one of the hardest roles, and I think that's partly because often we're looking for people who probably spend their whole life helping an organization remain financially sustainable and are very aware of the challenges. That's why we want their expertise. And then we're saying, would you like to do that in your spare time as well? And I think that's one of the challenges. So yeah, it is about what's different. So I think there's a few things. One, I think being aware that most of us are in some form of charity in the sector. So it doesn't need to be somebody who's actually in the sector directly to have experience of what it's like to be doing the finances of a museum, gallery, visitor attraction. So I think looking a little bit wider, because what can be interesting there, I recently recruited somebody to a treasurer role actually, and they worked in hospice charities, and they were delighted to say they were running away to the circus on their weekends. It was a circus skills charity. So I think there's a little bit of that. I think it is that classic thing about what's unique about your organization that should make somebody want to be involved. And I always think as well, it's sort of making sure people, yes, they're going to be looking after the finances. Yes, they're probably going to be looking after the finance and risk committee. Let's be honest, that often comes with that as well. But, what are the good bits that you get to do as well? Like when you're coming along and being at an event, at an opening, because, we can offer that in the kind of organizations we're talking about and are on the call here. Other charities can't necessarily. So you can both do something that's really good. And Gordon was telling me how the Enchanted Forest supports local communities, etc. You can do something good and actually have a little bit more fun than you might be able to have in other organisations. So I do think we should lean into that a bit.
I also think as well, David, that there's, I guess, when it comes to the practicalities around the recruitment piece, keeping the barriers to application to a minimum. That one stage processes, in person are typically more than sufficient to really understand someone's motivations for and expertise for a chair role or a trustee position. I think I sort of alluded to before about being sort of proactively rather than passively recruiting, and that can look at a number of different ways. But rather than just sort of putting out an advert and seeing who applies, really being proactive in that sense. Storytelling, we're all great at storytelling, and it's how do we describe the mission, the values that the organisation holds. How do we present a compelling story? Even a small thing like a message from the CEO or the current chair, thanking people in looking at this opportunity, I guess talking about the impact that they might have, not just a list of their roles or duties that the position would take into account for. So a few different things there, but absolutely, David and I are happy to discuss it in more detail if helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. John Hoy, any thoughts about establishing a junior board to enable learning and experience to be gained, with the junior board chair perhaps attending the main board as an observer?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the key thing is to make sure you're clear, if you're going to do that, on what the opportunity is for that board to have an impact and make a difference. I think what you don't want is to create something where it feels like, well, there's not really any real input. So, say for example, the chair coming along from the kind of the younger board, I think is a useful thing to do. So long as you're clear about what you'll be able to take forward and how you're going to report back. You don't want to create a sort of a parallel structure where there's sort of the feeling that there's a lot of talk but nothing can actually happen. But I do think it's a really good idea in terms of helping people to understand sort of how meetings work, how decisions are taken, and actually some of the bigger challenges there are. I think it does create you potential pipeline of future trustees. I think therefore it's also about thinking how you would manage that, because it doesn't necessarily mean because you've been involved in one element that you'll necessarily be part of the main board. So I think you've got to manage those expectations too. So I think there's a mix of it. I think it is a good thing to do. I think you go into it knowing kind of what level accountability and involvement those individuals are going to have. Al, I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
I absolutely agree with everything. I think we've had some really great conversations with organisations who've had a junior board, and seen the real impact that has, not just in diversification and a different views and opinions and thoughts, but in upskilling and looking at future boards and trustees for the future as well. So it does have certainly its merits, and I think I agree with David has in terms of just things to be mindful of as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Claire Lane, Commercial Director at the Ashmolean, said thank you for this very helpful session. One of the early slides mentioned the life cycle of a trustee. Is there a recommendation in relation to the average or maximum term for a trustee or non-exec director? Is there an acceptable number of repeat terms extensions? And is there a maximum limit that is recommended?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I know it's one that there's a lot of thought about. Really, we should be having term lengths for trustees, and that's sort of from a good governance point of view. Usually tends to be 3 years, and then quite often there's the opportunity for people to do a second term. we do also see people having 3 terms of 3 years, which kind of takes you to 9 years in total. You've got to think then about whether, if somebody becomes, for example, steps up to being chair, whether you're going to kind of reset the timer on that, what that would look like. I feel that a 3-year term is a really good term to have because it's long enough for somebody to get into the role. It also, I mean, let's not forget, a lot of people feel sort of very passionately about this. They'll get involved in a board and, you know, life circumstances may change. So actually, if you think about it, having that 3-year check-in, it might be the right time for somebody to step away for other reasons, and it gives them an easier opportunity to do that potentially. So I think you've got to think about it from both points of view. You want to kind of be refreshing your board fairly regularly, and I think, yeah, again, I would recommend that 3-year term, and I would say 2 to 3 terms as a maximum, and that's probably what we would see as best practice.
Claire has also, I guess this is one for myself and Paul to take away, but potential for us to create some kind of induction module to support recruitment. Really good idea. Thank you, Claire. Another one from Gordon. In terms of succession planning, do you recommend a vice chair role?
I definitely think a vice chair role is a good thing, a good role to have. I also think that, you know, increasingly we know a chair responsibility is a lot to take on. And so we would look at co-chair models. I'm working with a couple of organisations at the moment where we're looking at co-chairing in order to be able to split some of that requirement. But I think if you've got a vice chair as well, and you, again, if you've timed it right so that they don't have the vice chair's term finishing at the same time as the chair, have that opportunity for a sort of stagger, because then I think if you're looking for then someone to come in as a chair and they can see there's an experienced vice chair who perhaps for whatever reason doesn't want to step up into the chair role but can help them to settle in as part of that onboarding, I think that works really well. And I think it also gives people the other thing, if you don't have a vice chair as such, you may have some committees with chairs there, so people chairing subcommittees. So without wanting to create too many subcommittees, that can often be another useful sort of training ground, if you like, for people to have a go, see if they're enjoying it, and then whether they would want to step up to the main chair. So yeah, I definitely would support that.
I think also having a clear definition as well from expectations perspective of what is expected from the vice chair and the chair from their perspective, but also from the other trustees and the CEO's perspective of what that might look like is really important to make there's clear definitions on that as well.
Wonderful. Victoria Reeves, CEO, National Justice Museum, about to recruit for a new chair. Our lead finance trustee is a leader in Experian. She's fabulous and asks all the right questions, but we also need the rounded bit of finance, as she can be very black and white. She knows this. And sometimes charities, museums operate in grey.
I think that's a really valid point, and I think that is really something to test out. Again, we would generally recommend sort of not too many rounds of interviews, generally one interview round in person and an opportunity to meet some of the wider team, as we said. But I think digging into something like that, if someone's coming from a different sector, really and getting to under the skin of them, understanding your organisation as far as they can before they've joined, but also you being able to kind of set those expectations as an executive team and as a board around the fact that yes, you need to operate in shades of grey. And I think we know how important that commerciality is, but helping to translate some of the differences between a charity and a purely commercial organisation, I think can be just super helpful, because it stops people sort of maybe saying something which to them doesn't seem contentious but can put backs up immediately for people who sort of feel that somebody's come in and doesn't really understand the sector. So I guess in part of that induction, what I would say is, like, without wanting to make excuses for where you are now as an organisation and things that you might want to tackle, making sure you've shared the backstory in terms of the work people have done to get to a certain point is really important, especially in areas such as the finances, which can appear really black and white, as Victoria says.
Fabulous. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, that's been an absolutely fantastic session. Thank you so much, David and Alistair. Really a lot to take away and a lot to think about. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing more from you guys as you're developing another webinar for us later in the year after the summer. So yeah, look out for that. And yeah, just thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, everyone. And great questions as well. So yeah, happy to continue. If anyone's got any other questions they want to drop through to us, we're always happy to kind of try and answer or point you in the right direction.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat now, so it's been brilliant. Okay, we'll pause there. I'll stop the recording, and yeah, thank you everyone for joining us.